Tonight we glide back through time, literally. You're standing ankle-deep in snow, staring at a frozen marsh that stretches out under a pewter sky. It's quiet, except for the faint creak of wood and a strange scraping sound. A small group of peasants is tightening leather cords around what looks suspiciously like animal bones strapped to their feet. One of them waves you over and holds up a pair. The smell hits first, faintly gamey, like someone tried to Febreze a stew pot. You're going skating. Medieval style. You bend down to lace these prehistoric puppies to your boots, and instantly regret it. They dig into your soles like guilt into a Catholic. As you try to balance, sliding more than stepping, someone yells something that might be encouragement or a medieval insult. You don't understand a word, but it doesn't matter. You're on ice now. And you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your thighs are already burning, and you've only been at it for a minute. But your surroundings, bare trees, brittle reeds, and a couple of shrieking geese in the distance, pull you in deeper. This isn't just about skating for fun. For thousands of years, people used animal bones as makeshift transportation. It was survival gear, not sports equipment. The origins are older than castles, older than written history, so old that no one agrees where it started. Historians still argue whether it was first invented in Central Europe, or if some ancient Siberian genius tied an elk tibia to their foot and said, "Let's send it." Either way, here you are, slipping on what might be cow shin bones, trying not to fall on your 21st century pride. The thing is, skating like this is different from what you know. There's no blade to dig into the ice. You're gliding on the flattened surface of the bone itself, using a sharpened stick, yes, a stick, to push yourself forward. Think gondola vibes, but much colder and with a higher chance of accidentally stabbing yourself. Your skates were probably repurposed leftovers from dinner: beef, horse, deer. Once the marrow was scooped out and the ends drilled, they were threaded with leather and strapped under whatever counted as boots in the year 1200. Archaeologists have actually found these bone skates buried beside fireplaces, mixed in with discarded tools, or even placed in graves. It's possible someone thought they'd need to skate into the afterlife. Or maybe that was the medieval version of sentimental clutter. You watch one of the locals, barely a teenager, sail past you with practiced ease. He's got the movement down: push, slide, push again. His stick digs into the ice like a ski pole, and his glide is weirdly graceful, like a drunk swan. You try to copy it, and immediately do a spin that's 40% skill and 60% panic. Don't lean too hard, someone chuckles behind you. Or you'll end up like old Henrik. You turn. What happened to old Henrik? Exactly, he says, skating away. You shuffle forward, picking up speed, sort of. There's a strange thrill to it, this primal form of motion. It makes sense. If you lived in a place where half the year was an ice block, you'd figure out a way to slide across it too. Walking in deep snow is exhausting, and wheel-based transport? Useless. But a few leg bones and a dream. That, apparently, works. Suddenly, a bell rings in the distance. Not church-like, more like a cowbell tied to a pole. It's the local signal that the pond is starting to thin. A few people begin skating toward the shore. One guy dramatically yells, "Every man for himself," as he flails past you. You follow, wobbling, but now slightly better at it than 10 minutes ago. As you reach the edge of the ice, you step onto firmer snow and unlace the skates. Your feet tingle, partly from cold, partly from muscle confusion. You sit on a log and look down at the object in your hands. It's just a femur. Probably a horse's. Cleaned, scraped flat, and polished over time by 100 muddy winters and hopeful riders. It's not pretty, but it's effective. You wonder who first thought of this. Was it out of necessity? Did someone see a rabbit gliding across the ice and say, "I want that"? Or did they slip while carrying bones, land just right, and invent a whole new genre of movement? What's certain is this: people have always adapted to their environments in clever, sometimes ridiculous ways. Bone skates were just one of them. A weird little footnote in the long saga of human creativity and cold feet. The marsh begins to empty. The sun dips behind clouds. A couple of ducks honk their final warnings. And as you get up, brushing snow off your coat, you realize that bone skating isn't just a quirky medieval curiosity. It's a symbol of human resilience. Of using what you've got even if it smells a little like soup stock. And no, you still haven't figured out what happened to old Henrik. But you have a feeling he's chilling. Your boots crunch over frost as you wander away from the frozen marsh, but something tugs at your curiosity. You stop near a squat, frost-covered shed where someone's propped an old pair of bone skates against a barrel. They're worn thin at the edges, the surface polished smooth like river stones. You crouch, run your fingers along the length of the bone, and for a moment, you imagine what it was like before they were tools, when they were just bones. Thousands of years before the guy with the barrel or the smug teen on the ice, people were skating. Not as recreation, but as a means to survive. You're suddenly somewhere deeper in time, no villages, no roads. Just a flat stretch of frozen landscape, maybe what is now Hungary, or even Ukraine. And there, on the edge of a snowy plain, a hunter ties animal bones to his feet with leather thongs. Welcome to about 2000 BCE. This is the true beginning of skating. Not winter fun. Not sport. Transportation. A way to move across the brutal, slippery landscape without burning all your energy trudging through snowdrifts like a yeti with shin splints. If you think you're cold now, imagine doing this with no Gore-Tex, no thermal socks, and definitely no emergency hand warmers in your pockets. You were the hand warmer. In these ancient days, bones from horses, elk, reindeer, or cattle weren't just leftover soup ingredients. They were vital components of a primitive travel system. The skates didn't have metal blades, they weren't sharp at all. People pushed themselves forward with a long stick, like cross-country skiers with attitude. One of the earliest bone skates ever found came from Lake Moss in Denmark. Flat bones with holes at each end, just enough for leather straps to loop through. But there are even older discoveries. In what is now Finland, a pair of 5,000-year-old bone skates was unearthed, along with other hunting tools. Some archaeologists believe these early northern Europeans were practically born with bone skates on. Historians still argue whether this was something that developed independently in multiple regions, or whether one bright spark passed the idea along like some prehistoric influencer. The evidence is scattered: Finland, Sweden, Germany, Hungary, Russia. All places with nasty winters and big animals. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe cold weather just makes people more creative, and more desperate. One fringe theory? That early skates might have come from watching wolves. You raise your eyebrow, but stay with me. Some researchers think humans noticed how animals used slick pads and paws to slide short distances over ice. It's entirely possible someone tried to mimic that gliding motion using bones, thinking, if wolves can do it, I bet I can, too. Classic human hubris. The frictionless physics of the thing was part of the genius. Instead of sinking into the snow or slipping with every step, you glided. It didn't require much lift from the ice. With a decent push, you could cruise a good 10 or 15 feet, sometimes more if the surface was frozen glass. Sure, you looked like a deer on rollerblades, but you were moving faster than walking. Which meant less exposure, less time burning calories, and in the Ice Age, That kind of efficiency was the difference between surviving and becoming something else's lunch. And bone skates weren't just for individuals. Imagine small groups skating together across a frozen lake to trade, hunt, or deliver messages. There's even archaeological suggestion, based on multiple bone skates found in burial sites, that families skated. Children, elders, the whole gang, gliding across winter's back like characters from some Neolithic Disney on Ice special. Still, these weren't luxury tools. You had to make them yourself. You needed bones, carving tools, leather straps, and a decent pair of winter feet. The design was simple, but genius. Skates were often fashioned from metatarsals or shank bones, flattened and sometimes polished to reduce friction. The holes drilled at the ends were precise, too small and the straps broke, too big and your foot would twist and send you tumbling face first into the ice like a flailing frozen chicken. You wonder how many bruises it took before someone got the hang of it. How many slipped on the first push, cracked a tailbone, and threw the skate into the woods yelling ancient expletives. One archaeologist joked that early skating probably caused more injuries than it prevented. But hey, broken wrists heal. Frozen lungs, not so much. You pick up the skate again and inspect it more closely. It's not aerodynamic. It's not stylish. It's a hunk of animal leg polished into something mobile. But it works. And that, somehow, makes it beautiful. Like an Ice Age IKEA hack. The fire in the nearby shed crackles, pulling you back to the present moment. A woman inside offers you a thick fur-lined cloak and gestures to a map scratched into a wooden board. It shows old migration paths, dotted with little symbols. One of them, a skate, carved with surprising accuracy. Turns out, some of these ancient skating routes overlapped with trade paths. Goods were exchanged across frozen rivers and lakes in winter: salt, furs, bones, tools. Frozen waterways were highways before roads existed. And on those highways, people glided. As you wrap the cloak tighter, a few snowflakes drift down from the pale sky. The fire pops again. You close your eyes for a second and hear the ghost scrape of bone on ice in the distance. A prehistoric whisper. A memory of movement older than language. You smile. You can't help it. Because somewhere in your core, maybe in your DNA, you kind of get it. The cold, the simplicity, the pure weird efficiency of skating on bones. And for just a moment, you wish the world still needed it. Your fingers are still warm from that fire, but your feet ache in protest as you step back onto the frostbitten trail. Ahead of you, someone's dragging a sled, nothing fancy, just a plank tied to a couple of curved antlers with a pile of firewood stacked on top. They give you a knowing look, then nod toward the icy path you just left behind. You follow, and sure enough, a narrow skating track winds out across a wide stretch of lake. Your breath clouds the air as you step up to it again. Another pair of bone skates, this time hanging from a crooked fence post, dares you to give it another go. So you do. The skate bones today are narrower than before. Smoothed down to fine slivers, they look almost like stiff bookmarks made from some unlucky goat's femur. You strap them on, wincing, of course, and start pushing off with a branch-like pole. 1 glide. 2. You're not terrible. Probably not amazing. Let's say brave. The sound beneath you is subtle, a dry hiss as bone kisses ice. It's oddly soothing, like nature whispering through your soles. And as you gather speed, your mind drifts, not to the view, but to the bone itself. Who first thought, I'm going to strap meat leftovers to my feet and zoom? Whoever it was, they were clearly multitasking. You see, back in the murky depths of pre-medieval time, bones weren't just food scraps or weapons. They were tools. And not just any tools, bones were basically the duct tape of the ancient world. You could whittle them into needles, combs, dice, sled runners, and, of course, skates. But it wasn't as simple as grabbing any old leg bone. Skating bones had to be long and relatively flat, usually from horses, deer, or cattle. And more importantly, they had to be dense. Spongy bones cracked. Lightweight ones wore out too fast. It was a process. Cut it to size, grind the bottom smooth, polish it if you were fancy, and then drill small holes on either end so you could tie it securely beneath your shoe or foot wrap. Which, let's be honest, was probably just a chunk of animal hide with dreams of being a sock. The people who made these skates weren't doing it to go viral. They weren't interested in technique, or ice dancing, or triple axels. They were trying to get from point A to point B before frostbite kicked in. Still, there's something almost meditative about it. You push with your stick, glide, push again. And while it's not exactly effortless, it is smoother than trudging through waist-high snow with numb feet and a heavy pack. The skate doesn't cut into the ice like a modern blade, it glides on top of it. You're skimming the surface, not slicing it. Which also means, you can't turn well. At all. You attempt a minor shift left and end up performing a spin that could generously be called accidental pirouette. There's a bush nearby that becomes an emergency handbrake. Somewhere in the distance, someone watching claps once, very slowly. Modern blades can dig in, lean, grip the curves. But bone skates. They're a game of inertia and balance. There's no edge to pivot on. If you want to steer, you have to lean with your entire body like a medieval Segway. And if you want to stop, well, you should have started thinking about that 5 glides ago. Yet people managed. Entire communities lived like this. In the harshest months, the frozen lakes became highways. Skating wasn't about fun. It was mobility. Villages connected by icy ribbons. Hunters chasing deer across the frozen rivers. Parents dragging children to distant neighbors. And traders, grim-faced, frost-crusted, skating bundles of furs, grains, or salt from one village to another. Imagine doing DoorDash in sub-zero temperatures wearing cow bones on your feet. Respect. Some fringe historians speculate that these bone skate systems became so efficient that they were the first true winter roadways. That may sound like a stretch, but archaeological digs near ancient settlements show repeated wear grooves in the same frozen paths. Not a one-time game. A repeated, communal effort. Roots passed down like family recipes. This pond. That bend. Don't trust the black ice near the willow tree, it swallowed 3 pigs last year. And these weren't just quick, local runs. Evidence suggests some skaters covered miles in a day. Now remember, there were no GPS trackers, no warm-ups, and no "sorry, I sprained my tibia, can we reschedule" messages. If someone expected you before sunset, you either showed up or didn't, and if you didn't, well, they'd check the lake in spring. Still, historians argue whether bone skating was common across all northern peoples or more of a niche solution in certain harsh regions. Maybe it was both. Maybe there were communities that thought it was genius and others that preferred to ride sleds or just stay put. After all, there's always that one guy who refuses to update his snow boots because the old ones are fine. You reach the end of the lake trail and unstrap your skates. The bones are slick with melted ice and bits of mud. You stare at them again, marveling at how something so grotesquely simple could be so deeply functional. And a little weird. You can't help wondering if the ancient skaters joked about it too. If someone looked down one frosty morning and thought, you know, this is kind of insane. I'm skating on someone's femur. Maybe they laughed. Or maybe they just grunted and kept moving. A few stray snowflakes land on your sleeve, and the wind picks up again. You sling the skates over your shoulder like an old friend and step off the ice, your legs jelly but proud. Sliding over frozen lakes with butchered cow parts on your feet might sound barbaric. But honestly, it beats trudging through slush. The wind hums through the bare trees as you follow a shallow trail leading north, your feet aching from the bone skates, your calves in open rebellion. The landscape shifts, less marsh, more stone. You're somewhere colder now, harder. A place where the bones of the earth push up through the snow. And that's when you see it, a still, silver lake bordered by fir trees, silent as a held breath. This isn't just any lake. Welcome to prehistoric Finland. No, not Helsinki with its cozy cafes and overpriced salmon. We're talking about ancient Finland, wild, frozen, mostly unpronounceable. A place where the air bites, the snow doesn't melt until May, and skating wasn't a weekend hobby. It was instinct. You crouch by the water's edge and spot something half buried in ice. A long, smooth shard of bone, with a neat hole bored through the top. It's not just an artifact, it's the artifact. One of the oldest known bone skates ever discovered, pulled from the silent mud of a lake like this one. Archaeologists dated some Finnish bone skates back over 5,000 years. That's before the pyramids. Before Stonehenge. Before the word skate even existed. And what's wild? These early skates were shockingly advanced. Unlike the rough, chunky models found in Central Europe, Finnish bone skates were sleek. Narrower. Polished so smooth you could mistake them for driftwood, if not for the symmetry. Some had carefully shaped tips, almost aerodynamic. You wonder if their makers knew the principles of resistance and glide, or if they were just really good at failing until it worked. Historians still argue whether Finland was the origin of bone skating or just one of its most enthusiastic adopters. But one thing's clear, skating here wasn't a fringe habit. It was life. The geography demanded it. Finland has lakes. So many lakes. Over 180,000 of them, if you're counting, which, to be honest, no one really is. In winter, those lakes became highways. If you wanted to reach your neighbors, trade, or avoid trudging through pine forests with frozen mud up to your knees, you skated. You picture it now, ancient people wrapped in furs, gliding across glassy water like migrating birds. Leather bindings knotted tight around their reindeer hide boots. Long poles in hand, not for style, but for propulsion. Push glide, push glide. Repeat until the cold becomes background noise and your thighs scream in ancient Finnish. One unearthed pair was made from horse femurs, polished to perfection. Another pair from elk bones, drilled and grooved for better grip. And in one case, a bone skate carved with tiny decorative patterns. Not just functional, beautiful. It's a reminder that even survival tools can be art. That even when you're freezing your historically accurate butt off, you might still want to show a little flair. But let's talk maintenance. Because here's the dirty secret of bone skates, they don't work forever. Over time, they wear down. Uneven ice cracks them. Slushy weather warps the leather. And the worst offender, rocks hiding beneath thin ice. Nothing like gliding peacefully and then suddenly flying through the air like an ancient Nordic acrobat. So people became skate repair artists. Rescraping the base. Rebinding the straps. Heating the bones over low fires to make micro-adjustments. Some families probably had their own skate guy. You didn't just borrow someone else's unless you wanted to find your name scratched onto a very angry birch tree. You wander further along the lakeshore and come upon what looks like a burial cairn. Flat stones, a ring of pine branches, and resting at the center what might once have been a child's skate. Smaller than the others. Still bone, still smooth, but fragile. It's easy to imagine the child who wore it. Maybe they followed behind the adults, trying to keep up. Maybe they raced other kids across the frozen pond while the grown-ups argued about fur prices. Skating wasn't just for hunting or hauling. It was communal. There's fringe speculation, still hotly debated, that some early Finnish groups held winter festivals centered on skating. There's no hard proof, but you can't help picturing it. Torches along the lake, meat roasting over fire, and people challenging each other to gliding contests, laughing between chattering teeth. A more grounded theory? Skating was gender-neutral labor. Men, women, and children all participated. You didn't need to be a warrior or a noble. If you had bones and snow, you were in the game. That's the kind of democratic invention you rarely see from 3000 BCE. Of course, not everything about this skating utopia was charming. Fall wrong and you broke a rib. Strap a bone too tight and you cut off circulation, welcome to frostbite. Get too confident, skate too far into the lake's center, and the cracking ice became your final soundtrack. There's a reason some ancient skates were found near shallow shores. The smart ones stayed close. The bold ones, well, let's just say not all of them made it into the archaeology textbooks. You walk on, the sun low in the sky now, and reach a tiny lean-to shelter. Inside, hung on hooks, are more skates. Some are replicas. Some are real. You lift one gently. It's heavier than you'd expect. Solid. Honest. It smells faintly of oil and time. You sit for a moment, looking out at the lake, imagining it buzzing with prehistoric traffic. Quiet greetings in a lost language. Poles tapping rhythmically. Breath steaming in the pale light. Bone skates weren't an invention, they were a conversation. Between need and innovation. Between nature and defiance. Between ancient people and the seasons they were forced to outwit. And the funny thing is, despite the hardship, the cold, the constant threat of cracking your pelvis, you get it. There's something intoxicating about gliding across a frozen world using nothing but animal bones and stubbornness. It's part grace, part madness. And in Finland, they made it an art form. You leave the shelter behind, the lake's surface now glowing with a soft pink hue from the sinking sun. The trail ahead dips into rolling hills, and with every step, something begins to shift, not just in the terrain, but in the mood. The quiet efficiency of prehistoric survival starts giving way to something else: identity, social customs, regional flair. You're entering the medieval world now, and it's complicated. You find yourself in a village. Not a grand one with turrets and guards, but a cluster of wattle and daub cottages huddled together for warmth and gossip. Chickens squawk, smoke curls from chimneys, and someone somewhere is complaining about their back. A perfectly normal day in Northern Europe. But then you notice it. Propped up by the doorway of one cottage is a pair of bone skates. And across the village green, a child goes flying past on another, arms outstretched like a drunken starfish. You're in the post-Roman era now. The time when Europe was figuring itself out, one muddy field at a time. And here's the thing, not everyone was skating. The North? Absolutely. Scandinavia, the Low Countries, the Baltics? You bet. But Rome? Nah. Rome didn't skate. Rome built roads. Heated floors. Fancy sandals. Ice was for wine chilling, not traveling. Historians still argue whether the Romans ever even saw bone skates in action and thought, yeah, that's not for us. Maybe they were just too Mediterranean for it. Or maybe they couldn't see the point of tying cattle bones to their feet when they could just throw a toga party and wait for spring. But north of the Alps, bone skating was alive and gliding. You pass a group of villagers gathered around a fire pit, sipping something hot and mildly terrifying. A few of them have skates beside them, some bone, some early iron. It's a mixed bag. You overhear a snide remark, if he's so rich, why's he still using bone? OOF. The class shade is real. Because here's what's happening in this awkward medieval adolescence. Bone skates are starting to split along cultural lines. They're still everywhere, used by peasants, hunters, messengers, but slowly, quietly, new tech is creeping in. And it's fancy. Iron runners. Not blades yet, not the sleek surgical-looking ice daggers of today, but strips of metal fixed to wooden soles. They cut better. They steer better. They look better. But they're also expensive. And fragile. And honestly, most people can't afford them, don't trust them, or simply think bone works just fine, thanks. So what you get is a frozen landscape divided, bone users clinging to tradition and practicality, metal users skating with a bit more swagger, and everyone else just trying not to fall on their face. The dynamic is hilarious in its relatability. You can imagine the medieval equivalent of, nice skates, bro, dripping with irony. Still, the bone skate holds strong in the north. You follow a young woman as she straps hers on by a narrow creek. Her hands are chapped, but practiced. Her skates, cow bones, neatly shaped and smoothed. She pushes off with a crooked wooden pole and glides with the kind of confidence that makes your ankles wince in sympathy. Why stick with bones? Simple, they're cheap, easy to replace, lightweight, and they work. In regions where winters were brutal and snow lingered until April, people weren't chasing innovation, they were chasing utility. Bone skates could get you across a frozen lake to trade grain, or to a neighboring village to barter for wool, or to that boy who swore he didn't have a sweetheart, even though everyone knows he kissed Greta by the smithy. You hear an old man laugh behind you. He's sharpening a new skate. Metal? Too shiny. Too slippery. I don't trust anything that doesn't squeak. He holds up a femur like it's Excalibur. This'll outlive me. And he's probably not wrong. One particularly quirky detail you stumble upon in a musty shed, a cache of bone skates with tiny etched runes carved into the surface. Protection spells, perhaps? Maybe. Or directions. Or just some bored skater's version of medieval graffiti. Archaeologists are still puzzling over whether these markings held cultural meaning or were just someone flexing their carving skills. You notice something else. Bone skates are beginning to vary not just by region, but by design. In Scandinavia, they're longer, sleeker. In the Low Countries, flatter and more rectangular. Some even come with little notches on the bottom to better grip the ice. It's like a skate fashion show, minus the glitz and plus a lot of frostbite. As the day winds down, you stumble into a barn where a group of kids are practicing their glides. It's chaotic. One crashes into a bale of hay. Another skids into a goat. But in the center of it all is a boy, maybe 9, maybe 10, moving like he was born on bone. Arms tucked, feet steady, mouth open in sheer delight. He turns sharply, actually turns, and you swear the goat nods in approval. It hits you then, skating is becoming more than just utility. It's becoming culture. Embedded in how people live, move, even play. Sure, the folks in warmer Europe were sipping wine under olive trees, their sandals blissfully bone-free. But up here, they were skating. Out of necessity, yes. But also for fun. For community. For identity. The sun dips lower, and you walk away from the barn, your breath frosting in front of you. Somewhere in the dark, someone lights a lantern and drags a shovel across the snow. You look back one more time. Bone skates leaning against walls. Boots drying by the fire. The crisp memory of motion still lingering on the ice. Rome shrugged. But the north skated. The sky deepens into a dusky violet as you head further into the north, colder, harsher, where the winds bite and the people bite back harder. You're somewhere Scandinavian now, though no sign announces it. The language is rougher, the fur's heavier, and the skates. They've leveled up. You spot a figure in the distance gliding across a wide, frozen river. He moves like a ghost, quick, sharp, controlled. When he finally comes to a halt near you, spraying up a tiny puff of frost, you realize this isn't just some villager. He's a Viking. Not a horned helmet cosplay Viking, but a real one, weathered, fur-cloaked, with a beard that could shelter a bird. And strapped to his feet. Bone skates, of course. But these aren't your average dinner leftovers. These are long, honed, strapped with thick hide bindings that double as ankle support. The Norse weren't just skating, they were engineering. Cold enough to flay your soul, the Viking mutters, patting the side of his sled. Good skating weather. You nod politely, pretending you're not freezing through 5 layers of modern smugness. Here's where things start to get intense. Because for the Norse, bone skating wasn't just transport. It was tactical. You're in an era where raiding, trading, and surviving all depended on movement, and when the fjords froze, you didn't wait around. You adapted. Bone skates were found in multiple Viking Age sites across Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, sometimes near harbors, other times deep inland. Some even appeared in burial sites. That's how important they were. You weren't just buried with weapons or jewelry. If you were a skater, you took your gear with you to Valhalla. Historians still argue whether Vikings ever used skates in battle. Seems unlikely. Imagine charging into war trying not to spin out like a confused penguin, but they did use them in raids and scouting. Scouts could skate across frozen terrain quickly and quietly. Messengers could deliver warnings. Traders could move goods to and from ships locked in by ice. Bone skates weren't combat gear, but they were absolutely part of the logistical machine. You sit beside the Viking as he sharpens his pushing stick, less a pole now, more a short spear with an iron point. Dual purpose. Push with it on the ice, stab a wolf if necessary. A true Viking multi-tool. Nearby, a group of younger Norse skaters is preparing for what looks suspiciously like a race. They tie their skates with ritualistic focus. The bones are long and narrow, likely from horses or elk. Each has unique carvings on the surface, runes, knots, and occasionally, what appears to be a doodled dragon. Because even in 900 AD, you still had that one guy who thought personalizing his gear made him faster. One kid catches your eye. He's clearly the underdog, his skates are mismatched, the leather worn thin, but the determination on his face is legendary. The whistle blows, okay, it's a guy yelling Geo, with a lot of enthusiasm, and the racers take off. The push-glide rhythm is almost musical. You hear the crunch of stick tips against the ice, the swish of bone on frozen water, and the occasional shouted insult that probably translates to something about someone's goat. The crowd, mostly adults sipping mead and trying not to shiver, is surprisingly into it. You glance back at the older Viking, who's watching with a mix of pride and mild concern. They've got the energy, he mutters. But none of the discipline. I once skated from Trondheim to Uppsala in 3 days. You open your mouth to ask how many hot meals he had along the way, but wisely decide against it. Here's something quirky. Viking skaters had to train for balance. Because bone skates don't bite the ice like blades do, balance is everything. You lean too far forward. Face first into a snowbank. Too far back. Hello, tailbone. There's evidence that children in Norse communities started skating young. Some bone skates discovered were only a few inches long. Miniature, but fully functional. Little Viking toddlers pushing themselves around the fjord like frosty Roombas. There's even one Norse saga that mentions a skating contest as part of a man's trial of strength. It's brief, but it suggests that skating held symbolic power. That it wasn't just for travel, but for showing off. For flirting. For flexing. You can imagine a Viking hunk dramatically gliding past a gaggle of admirers, pretending not to care but definitely flexing those calves. You notice a strange game starting now on the lake. 2 teams of skaters, using sticks to knock around what looks like a frozen lump of cheese. It's fast, chaotic, and almost certainly the spiritual ancestor of hockey, minus the penalties and the ad breaks. Suddenly, one of the skaters takes a tumble. He lands hard, clutching his ribs and yelling something that probably translates to "I'm fine, but someone owes me a new spleen." His friends help him up, laughing. One offers him a sip of something fermented and suspiciously chunky. Accidents were part of the deal. Bone skating was not for the delicate. Without edges to grip, control was all about core strength and guts. And when you fell, you didn't have helmets or padding. You had pride and a sheep's wool tunic. If you were lucky. By evening, the race is done. The underdog didn't win, but he finished strong and skated straight into a snowbank with the dignity of a collapsing Viking monument. His friends carry him off like a hero, cheering. One of them gestures for you to try. You shake your head, politely decline, but you can't help smiling. The thing about the Norse approach to skating, it wasn't precious. It was just part of life. As normal as chopping wood or insulting your cousin's cooking. You skated to get somewhere. You skated to work. You skated because walking was for people with boring calves. And for all their stoicism and battle cries, these fur-wrapped warriors, they had a little fun with it too. You wake to a strange sound, somewhere between a rusty wheelbarrow and a goose with anger issues. It takes a second to register that it's someone scraping bone skates along rough morning ice. You peek outside the creaky cottage where you spent the night, if you can call 3 hours of shivering sleep a night, and you see a line of villagers preparing for the daily grind. Literally. Welcome to the medieval peasant experience. Poverty, potatoes, and permafrost. You step outside into a scene that could be lifted from a page of a forgotten manuscript, except no one here is writing anything. They're too busy hauling buckets of water, tending fires, and strapping bone skates to their cracked boots with frayed leather. One man sneezes so violently his skate flies 10 feet across the ice and nearly decapitates a chicken. It's barely dawn. This is the High Middle Ages, roughly the 12th or 13th century, and bone skating is alive and, well, not quite thriving, but persisting. It's not glamorous. It's not elegant. It's an icy commute powered by bone, blister, and begrudging determination. You join a woman named Marguerite, who looks like she's seen 18 winters too many and hasn't been impressed by a single one. She offers you a pair of goat bone skates and a stick that might have once been part of a fence. Push with the tip, she grunts, unless you enjoy falling flat on your noble behind. There's no ceremony. No warm-up. No grace. She launches forward across the frozen pond like a stubborn sled dog. You follow, sliding jerkily, pole jabbing the ice every few feet. It's not pretty, but it's effective. This is skating stripped down to its core, utility over aesthetics. Speed over style. You're not carving elegant turns, you're trying not to faceplant in front of a pig. The bone skates here are a little different from the Viking ones. Shorter, thicker, roughly carved, more like improvised ice shoes than precision instruments. They're made from whatever's available, cow shin, horse femur, even deer bones if you were lucky, or rich enough to hit one with a bow and not cry afterward. These were not prestige items. These were Tuesday solutions. Still, historians agree, people were using them all across medieval Europe's colder regions. Holland, Germany, Poland, the Baltics, wherever ice and livestock coexisted, bone skating hung on like a determined wart. What's wild? We know peasants skated because medieval documents actually mention them. One 14th century Dutch account complains about lowborns gliding over the canals like devils on knives. Which sounds a little jealous, honestly. If someone's going to insult your bone shoes, at least respect the speed. But skating wasn't always accepted with open arms. Historians still argue whether local lords encouraged or tolerated skating, or whether it was one of those fine if we don't see it kind of arrangements. Some towns had unspoken rules. Stay off the ice near the church. Don't skate before chores. No racing pigs again, Wilhelm. Yet, For many peasants, skating wasn't just transportation, it was survival. In winter, paths became useless. Wagons froze. Boots cracked. But the ponds, the rivers, they became expressways. You could reach the mill in minutes instead of slogging through 3 feet of snow. You could visit your sick uncle, or escape your unpaid debts, temporarily, or just get out for once in your life. You skate behind Marguerite now as she leads you along a familiar route. Her movements are practiced. Push, glide, coast, adjust. Her stick taps in rhythm like a third leg keeping time. She doesn't talk much, but every once in a while, she spits into the snow and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like idiots with iron blades. There's a lot of attitude packed into this tiny woman with frostbitten toes and judgmental eyes. And honestly, you're kind of into it. Bone skating in the Middle Ages didn't care about elegance. You didn't need to twirl. You needed to not die. That was the threshold. And so, the skates became tools, not toys. Peasants used them to ferry supplies. Hunters glided silently across marshes. Couriers carried messages between villages faster than anyone on foot. Some fringe scholars even suggest that peasant skaters formed loose skating guilds in particularly icy regions, not official ones, but groups that passed down knowledge. Which lakes were safe? Which bindings lasted longer? How to carve a bone to reduce wobble? It's a compelling theory, though skeptics point out that most peasants couldn't write, so if these guilds existed, they left no records. Just legends. Still, the technology didn't advance much. Bone was plentiful, familiar, and replaceable. Why upgrade? Metal was expensive, rare, and required a blacksmith. If your skate broke, you carved a new one. If your ankle twisted, tough luck. No insurance. Just ale and prayer. You pause near a wooden bridge and see a teenage boy struggling with his bindings. His skates are a mess, one's a sheep bone, the other might be part of a table leg. He shrugs. It works, he says, before pushing off and immediately spinning into a frozen bush. Marguerite sighs so hard it melts a nearby icicle. Even in this world of scraping poverty and thick frost, people made time for skating. Kids played races. Couples skated hand in hand, awkward, giggling, bundled in rags. You spot two lovers doing just that, barely staying upright, more focused on each other than the path. One trips and takes the other down with a yelp and a laugh. A moment of joy, carved from bone and winter. Later, you gather near a fire as villagers warm their feet and slap their numb fingers against their sides. Skates are piled nearby, bones steaming gently in the heat. One man's skate has split, and he mutters a curse while chewing on a carrot. Another offers him part of a dried cow leg, half serious. Give it a scrape, it might get you home. And you realize, in this frozen corner of the Middle Ages, bone skates were more than transport. They were part of daily life. As common as a dull knife or a bad back. Crude, yes. Inefficient by modern standards. But they worked. And honestly, that was enough. A rooster crows as the village behind you fades into fog. You press onward, following a winding river that looks more like a cracked mirror than a waterway. Bone skates dangle from your shoulder again, dry now, but nicked and worn, like loyal dogs who've chased you through a dozen winters. Today, the journey shifts eastward into the sprawling, snowbound territories of medieval Russia. Not the imperial Russia of czars and chandeliers. No, this is Kievan Rus. Forested, remote, mysterious. A place where the rivers are wide, the wolves are bold, and the winters will slap you just for blinking wrong. And here, deep in the 11th or 12th century, bone skates aren't just surviving, they're thriving. You arrive at a riverside camp just as a group of travelers begins to suit up for the day's journey. Their robes are thick, made from wool and fur, layered in that "I hope this keeps my insides inside" way. Each of them is equipped with, you guessed it, bone skates, but these ones are subtly different. Longer. Narrower. Their ends are slightly curved, almost like primitive ski tips. And each is etched, not decoratively, but functionally, with weight notches and user marks, almost like skate sizes in an Ice Age footlocker. You slip into line and begin strapping your own on. One of the travelers, a round-faced boy with frost on his eyelashes, grins at you. First time in Novgorod territory, he asks, teasing. You nod, and off you go, gliding in a loosely formed caravan across the river. The early sun glows pale through the trees, the ice squeaks beneath you, and the silence is punctuated only by the rhythmic crunch of skate poles and the occasional grunt when someone hits a pinecone at Mach 2. The people here aren't skating for fun. They're skating for commerce. Medieval Russia's landscape is vast, too vast for easy travel by foot, too frozen for carts during the worst winters. But the rivers, they became nature's highways. And bone skates were your toll-free, foot-powered vehicles. Here's where it gets fascinating. While Western Europe was dabbling with iron blades and noble twirls, Eastern Europe doubled down on the bone game. Archaeologists have found entire clusters of skates around ancient trading posts along the Volga and Don. In Novgorod, skates were uncovered in layers of urban muck alongside coins, tools, and combs, as normal as a hairbrush or a cooking pot. And the design? Surprisingly advanced. Many had flattened, smoothed undersides, but also subtle ridges on the top to guide the foot. Some were bound not with leather thongs, but strips of woven birch bark, twisted tight for both flexibility and grip. Innovation through availability. You use what the forest gives you. Historians still argue whether these regional design differences arose out of necessity or simply cultural preference. Was it function, fashion, or frostbite avoidance? No one knows for sure. But one thing's certain, Russian bone skaters were efficient. Fast. Quiet. Practical. And sometimes, just a little dramatic. One surviving story from a Rus chronicle tells of a winter courier who skated over 100 versts, about 100 kilometers, in a single day to deliver a message to a nearby fortress. The legend claims he collapsed afterward, mumbling something about squirrel jerky and never again, but the point stands, bone skating was serious business. You reach a frozen crossroads, literally. Paths diverge down multiple waterways, and your guide stops to check a crude map carved into a birch panel. It's surprisingly elegant, etched with tiny marks and grooves. He studies it, then nods toward the southern fork. Shorter, he says. But wolves. You go the other way. As you skate, you notice something unusual. Many of these travelers are women. Strong, swift, experienced. One even skates while cradling a swaddled baby strapped across her chest. You double take, but no one else seems fazed. Here, bone skating is so embedded in life that everyone does it. There's no novelty, no hierarchy, just ice, bone, and movement. You pause for lunch at a windbreak, sharing smoked fish and black bread with the caravan. One man takes off his skates and begins rewrapping the leather bindings, hands working from habit. His skates are deer bone, longer than most, slightly curved at the ends, and engraved with a personal mark, 3 dots in a triangle. Family sigil, he says. If I fall through the ice, they know it was me. Cheerful. You chew your bread slowly, grateful that ice this thick probably won't swallow you just yet. The topic turns to superstition. There's a belief among some travelers that a clean skate, one used only for skating and never for butchering or fire tools, will glide traw. It's probably nonsense. But every group has one person who insists their skates are blessed or shaped by spirits. One woman swears her left skate once hummed during a full moon. You smile politely and scoot closer to someone who hasn't named their footwear. Some fringe archaeologists even propose that in certain Slavic rituals, bone skates were used during winter ceremonies, perhaps as symbols of transition, journey, or rebirth. It's unproven, of course. But in a culture where fire, water, and ice were sacred forces, skating might have meant more than just getting from A to B without freezing your nose off. By late afternoon, the caravan slows as you approach a river junction dotted with small wooden huts. Merchants greet your group with grunts and nods, pulling sleds piled high with furs, candles, and honey. There's no fanfare, just the efficient hum of winter trade. And all around, skaters. Dozens of them. Gliding between huts. Hauling goods. Delivering news. Playing a rough game that involves shoving each other with sticks. Probably not sanctioned by any medieval sports committee. You lean against a tree and watch as a child, maybe 8, performs a flawless glide, skates made from polished elk bone, bound expertly by someone who clearly knew what they were doing. He sticks the landing, slides to a stop, and throws snow at a friend like a pint-sized snow ninja. You can't help but smile. Because here, on the icy arteries of medieval Russia, bone skates aren't fading. They're thriving. The wind howls low and steady, a ribbon of sound that threads through the trees as you follow a frozen canal east into the Low Countries. The snow's softer here, the terrain flatter. But don't be fooled, this place is not gentler. It's just sneakier. You've entered medieval Holland, and from the look of it, the entire region is held together with willpower, dikes, and an alarming number of wooden shoes. The Dutch know ice. They know canals. And they definitely know skates. But what might surprise you is that, for centuries, they clung to bone skates long after other regions had started flirting with metal. And they didn't just use them. They optimized them. You arrive in a small Dutch hamlet that looks like it was built out of gingerbread and Calvinist gilt. Brick houses squat low against the wind, canals crisscross the fields like glass veins, and everywhere are skaters. Not just farmers and fishermen, but kids, women, clergy, a pig being gently towed across the ice by 2 children, unclear if the pig consents. Bone skates are still king here, but they've evolved. Sleeker. Standardized. Refined. You wander into a small workshop where a man, let's call him Dirk because of course, carves a set of skates with steady, practiced hands. The bones. Cow metatarsals, sanded flat on one side, notched for better strap placement. Dirk doesn't speak much, but he points to a stack of finished pairs, each marked with a crude tally system. Small, medium, large, and for people who shouldn't be skating. You pick up a pair. They're deceptively light. The surface is oiled, almost glossy. These aren't scrap tools, they're crafted objects. This is where bone skating hit its design peak. Not flashy, but functional to the last detail. Outside, the ice cracks softly beneath a line of market-goers gliding to a nearby town. This is what's different here. Skating isn't just for survival anymore. It's become logistics. Economy. Infrastructure. Think of it as the Amazon Prime of medieval transportation, bone-skated goods delivered in 2 to 5 glides. And that infrastructure? It's growing. By the 14th century, Holland was threading canals through everything like frostbitten embroidery. These frozen highways connected towns, markets, churches. Entire cities relied on winter skating traffic to keep food and supplies moving when wheels stopped working and boats froze in place. Bone skates were the only thing keeping society from slipping into complete standstill. Literally. There are even tax records, yes, medieval accountants were a thing, that mention ice travel. One listed an itemized charge for a messenger's 2 sets of leg bones, good condition. Historians still argue whether this referred to skates or just a dark joke about what happened to the last messenger. You follow a woman named Lisbeth as she skates toward the next town over. She's hauling a basket of fish so pungent it could be weaponized. Her skates are bone, sure, but bound with sturdy wool strips and reinforced with extra leather. She's clearly a veteran. Skated through childbirth, she mutters, almost proudly. Didn't drop a single herring. You do your best to keep up. Here in Holland, skating isn't gendered. It isn't noble. It's everyday. You pass schoolchildren heading to lessons via frozen canal, priests delivering sermons on skates, and one harried father trying to corral 4 toddlers gliding in different directions like cursed ducklings. The culture has absorbed skating into its marrow. And unlike in the past, people are starting to enjoy it. You arrive just in time for a fair, a pop-up festival on the ice, complete with food stalls, sleigh rides, and what appears to be competitive pancake flipping. There's even a skating game involving a wooden hoop and an alarming amount of shrieking. The skaters here aren't just competent, they're graceful. They weave through crowds, pivot smoothly, and even perform little hops over cracks in the ice. They're still on bone skates, but they move like they've been doing this since the womb. And honestly, they probably have. You join a group of children warming their feet near a fire pit. One offers you a chunk of syrup-soaked waffle while another points proudly at her skates. From my opa, she says. Still sharp. The bones have been passed down through 3 generations. There's a chip on one end that she says came from an ill-timed kick at a goose. The goose won. But even amid the joy and the skating waffles, a shift is beginning. You see it in the smithy across the canal, where a man hammers flat a strip of iron to curve into something new. A customer waits, watching intently. The bone skate's long reign is still alive, but its end has entered the room. Still, not everyone's convinced. Many peasants prefer bones, they're cheaper, quieter, easier to maintain. Metal is flashy, sure, but when it cracks, you're stuck with a very expensive paperweight and a very cold walk home. Bone can be replaced with the leftover stew ingredient. No one ever cried over a broken femur skate. Some fringe historians argue that bone skating persisted in rural Holland well into the 16th century, long after metal had taken over city centers. It's debated, of course. Was it economic stubbornness or cultural tradition? Maybe both. Maybe some people just liked the squeaky, satisfying slide of polished cow bone against black ice. As night falls, lanterns are lit along the canal. Their flickering glow reflects in the ice, casting long, golden shadows of the skaters still out gliding. You sit for a while, watching as the skates whisper past, each one a quiet rebellion against gravity and cold. There's a certain poetry here. A kind of harmony between human and winter. These aren't athletes. They're not trying to impress anyone. They're just moving, living, gliding from one frozen day to the next. You slip your skates back on bones, chipped and familiar, and take one last turn around the canal. The ice groans softly beneath you. A reminder that nothing lasts forever. But for now, bone still rules. And in Holland, they've turned it into an art. The night air clings to your clothes like frost on a windowpane as you skate westward under a quilt of stars. The Dutch canals fade behind you, and you cross into what is now northern France, Flanders, to be precise. The land of wool, walled towns, and enough merchant guilds to make your taxes weep. You find yourself in the early 15th century, and something feels different. Not colder, not busier, but tenser, as if the air itself knows that something old is about to slip beneath the surface. You pass through a town where the marketplace is shuttered, the river's frozen stiff, and the only movement is a solitary skater zipping along with practiced precision. He's not on bone. You're seeing one of the first serious adopters of metal runners. They're crude by modern standards, flat iron strips nailed to thick wooden soles, but compared to bone, they're the iPhone of the Ice Age. The skater vanishes around a bend, and you're left standing with your old bone skates dangling sadly like obsolete software. And just like that, you've arrived at the tipping point. This is the beginning of the end for bone skates. You find a nearby workshop, dimly lit, smoky, and full of the clanging sounds of innovation. Inside, a blacksmith is hammering red-hot iron into a rough, curved form. His apprentice sharpens another runner against a stone wheel, sparks flying like fireflies. And hanging near the forge, almost forgotten, is a pile of old bone skates. Dusty. Cracked. One is burned along the edge, as if someone tossed it into the fire and thought, "We're done here." Historians still argue whether the shift to metal was born from fashion, necessity, or good old medieval peer pressure. Probably all three. But what's certain is that by the 15th century, something had changed. The merchant class was rising. Trade was booming. And in the wealthier parts of Europe, appearance began to matter. If you were skating in bone, you were poor, functional, practical. But if you were skating in iron, you were somebody. That shift wasn't just technical, it was cultural. Bone skates were tied to commoners, peasants, travelers. Iron skates became symbols. You weren't just skating, you were being seen. There are illustrations from the late 1400s showing nobility gliding across manicured garden ponds in skates that gleam like armor. These weren't hardened winter survivors. These were people whose idea of effort was choosing between red wine and slightly redder wine. But let's not bury the bones just yet. Because while the upper classes were busy inventing the recreational skate, bone still had life left in it, especially in rural regions. You travel south through tiny villages clinging to riverbanks like frostbitten barnacles. And what do you see? Bones. Everywhere. Farmers gliding to nearby towns. Children playing on frozen fields. Traders delivering salted eels with the help of trusty old femur skates. In places where the iron skate hadn't yet trickled down or simply wasn't trusted, bone stayed on its throne. You meet a woman named Celeste, a miller's wife who's never seen metal skates up close. "Too sharp," she says, adjusting the straps on her worn cowbone pair. "Too quick to cut you open. These," she gestures to her skates, "these only hurt your pride." You spend the day with her, skating from village to village. The snow is shallow, the air crisp, and her movements are pure efficiency. She skates like someone who's been doing it since she could toddle, no flair, no speed bursts, just relentless glide. She's got a sack of flour slung over her shoulder and a low center of gravity that would put Olympic athletes to shame. And you realize something. Bone skating isn't just surviving here. It's resisting. The rise of metal was inevitable, sure. But in places like this, where money was scarce and pride ran deep, bone became more than just a tool. It was a symbol of endurance, of practicality, of the people who couldn't afford to be trendy but still needed to get where they were going, preferably without freezing. You break for lunch in a frost-covered orchard. Celeste pulls out some crusty bread, a hunk of cheese, and a knife that probably doubles as a skate repair tool. She tells you how, every winter, the whole village floods the lower fields to make a skating rink. "We race the kids," she says. "We call it Skull River. Not because of actual skulls, though we did lose a goose once." You laugh, but she's already chewing. Later that day, you find a tattered notice nailed to a church door, a local tournament. Not of jousting or swordplay, but skating. Open to all manner of traveler, trader, child, or fool willing to fall. It's a community event, and the prize? A fresh chicken and half a wheel of cheese. Of course you enter. You line up with a dozen other hopefuls, bone skates polished, ready. Some skaters wear cloaks. Others just look cold and determined. The priest raises his hand, bellows Geo, and the chaos begins. You push off, pole digging, legs pumping, and immediately get elbowed by a shepherd with the speed of a caffeinated squirrel. The ice is uneven, and a few competitors wipe out within seconds, limbs flailing like startled frogs. But you keep going. You slip, You recover. You glide. And for a moment, bone or not, you feel like you belong to something ancient and stubborn and beautiful. You don't win. A toothless boy named Unri beats you by about 40 feet and accepts the chicken like it's Olympic gold. But you finish. You don't fall. And Celeste claps you on the back like you just outran a plague. That night, back at her cottage, you help her oil the skates. She tells you how her grandfather taught her to shape the bones, how to use hot water, how to sand the underside with riverstone, how to tell when a crack means the end. Bones speak, she says. If you listen. Outside, a gust of wind stirs the frost into little ghosts across the field. Tomorrow, she'll skate again. So will Unri. So will everyone in this little corner of Europe still hanging on to the old ways. Because while the cities may have turned to iron, out here, the bone still whispers. The dawn arrives with a yawn and a crack ice settling across a long-abandoned river path as you leave Celeste's cottage behind. The bones in your satchel knock softly together with every step, the rhythm steady, familiar, like a heartbeat made of centuries. You move inland now, toward the heart of Europe, and something starts to change, not in the air or the ice, but in the idea of skating itself. You've hit the Renaissance. And let's be honest, nothing ruins a good practical invention faster than a rich guy trying to show off. Skating is no longer just a tool, it's on the verge of becoming a pastime. A leisure activity. A thing you do not because you have to, but because your coat has gold buttons and your ego has never tasted humility. Your path brings you to Bruges, a once bustling center of trade and taste. You glide into the city's outer edges, where frozen canals now mirror the rising sun and reflect something both familiar and alien. Dozens of people on the ice, but they're posing. One man holds a lute. Another tries to twirl a silk scarf while remaining upright. And somewhere nearby, a painter is squinting at the chaos, trying to turn it into something noble. Bone skates are still in use here, but they've become decorative. You spot a pair carved with intricate scrollwork, lacquered for shine. Not necessarily more functional, just more flamboyant. You've entered the age of the vanity skate. You wander into a square where townsfolk are gathered for what appears to be a staged demonstration. A herald shouts, "Behold, Master Engelbrecht of Ghent on frozen feet." Out rolls a man with a powdered wig, a tight doublet, and absolutely no business being on ice. His bone skates, you notice, have been gilded. Actual gold leaf. He pushes off with a dramatic flourish, and immediately faceplants into a cart of onions. The crowd applauds politely. A merchant nearby leans over. "He's the mayor's cousin," he whispers. "We pretend he's brilliant. Keeps the tax rate stable." This is skating at a crossroads. The nobility has noticed it, and as usual, they've ruined it. Bone skates were originally about necessity. Now, they're accessories. Yet beneath all the fluff, the roots remain. You meet a young artisan named Peter who still carves bone skates the old way, out of ox tibia. His shop is tiny, tucked between a tannery and a bakery, both equally smelly, in opposing ways. Peter invites you in, his fingers stained with dye and soot. "Metal's fine," he says, "but bone has memory." He hands you a pair of new skates, light, beautifully shaped, polished smooth. "People think we carve them, but we just release them from the bone." You nod slowly, pretending that's not a little ominous. Historians still argue whether these Renaissance-era bone skates were more ceremonial than practical. Some were never used, just displayed in homes or gifted as tokens. Others were part of guild games or winter fairs. But the truth is likely mixed. Utility skating still happened, especially among the lower classes, but with growing affluence and changing ideas about recreation, skating started to split into two parallel paths, one old and bony, one new and shiny. You lace up Peter's skates and hit the city's outer canal. It's broader here, and smoother. You glide past taverns, churches, and bridges that seem frozen mid-blink. Every so often, a child in wooden shoes waves at you. One even pelts you with a snowball. You respond in kind, nobly, and miss by 3 meters. He bows mockingly and disappears behind a wall of laundry frozen stiff like ghost flags. Farther along the canal, you catch sight of a group practicing synchronized skating, sort of. They're dressed in matching cloaks and attempting to form a star shape while gliding in unison. One lady wipes out spectacularly, taking 2 others with her. There's laughter, applause, and no one is injured, which counts as a triumph. Even among the performance and pageantry, Bone remains. It's just adapting. Skates are being modified, bone bases with iron strips nailed in, hybrids born of curiosity and economic transition. One boy zips past on what looks like a literal horse jaw. You can't tell if it's innovation or desperation. In a quiet corner near a weaver's shop, you meet a woman sketching. She's documenting skate designs, bone, iron, mixed materials, saying she's writing a book. About movement, she says, and what it says about us. Her notebook is full of diagrams, but also notes about posture, balance, even grace. For the first time, someone's trying to analyze skating as a kind of expression. Not just transportation, not even recreation, but something more. You move on. Late that evening, you join a gathering near the town gate. A makeshift rink has been cleared, torches stuck in snowbanks casting flickering light on the ice. Families gather with baskets of food, skaters take turns showing off their glides, and somewhere, a man is very seriously attempting to juggle geese while skating in a circle. They seem mostly on board. And just like that, you see it, bone skating as tradition. Not quite dead. Not yet obsolete. Just shifting. Still rooted in everyday life, especially among poorer citizens and rural communities. But now joined by new interpretations. Bone skating was no longer the only way, or even the best way, but it still was a way. Revered. Remembered. Reinvented. The fire crackles. Someone plays a reed flute. The stars overhead gleam in brittle silence. You strap your skates back on and glide through the darkness, bone runners whispering secrets across the ancient ice. You wake to the sound of bells, a soft, distant chime that could be a chapel or just someone shaking frost off a goat. Either way, the Renaissance is fading behind you like breath on a window pane, and the modern world is rumbling awake. You travel northeast again, this time toward the icy canals of what is now northern Germany. It's the late 15th century, maybe early 16th. The printing press is starting to spread ideas faster than you can skate. Empires are flexing. Merchants are multiplying. And winter. Still doing winter things. Still freezing everything in sight. But bone skates, your faithful, splintery companions, are beginning to struggle to keep up. Not that they've vanished. You still see them. In pockets. In barns. On the feet of children wobbling through alleyways. But the shift is undeniable. Iron is rising. You pause at the edge of a frozen river near Lübeck and spot a boy zipping past. He's maybe 12, scarf trailing like a comet tail, and he's using metal-bladed skates, not sleek figure skates, but heavy, utilitarian irons bolted to thick wooden soles. He glides like a dart and doesn't even look back. You glance down at your own bones. You still love them. But yeah, they're starting to feel a little prehistoric. The towns are changing too. You enter one that feels more like a factory than a village. Tradespeople buzz like frostbitten bees, and everywhere you look, tools are sharper, straighter, shinier. Even the blacksmith has a sign that boasts speed skates and a rack of metal runners polished like silverware. Inside, he's not just making skates, he's selling status. You overhear him say, "Crafted for the merchant class, no more slipping about like a goat on ice." He points proudly to a pair of curved iron blades with carved oak soles. They're gorgeous. They're balanced. They're completely unaffordable. Historians still argue whether the shift from bone to metal was driven by technology or taste. Likely both. Bone was cheap, yes, but it required skill. Metal? If you had the coin, you didn't need to know how to carve or sand or bless a skate with leftover mutton grease. You just bought it. Simpler. Faster. Sexier. But here's the thing, even in the age of iron, bone skates didn't just vanish like a snowball in spring. You travel into the rural outskirts, small farms, crooked fences, goats that look suspiciously judgmental, and you see them, bone skates. Still strapped on. Still moving. You meet an old man named Hans, hunched like a question mark and sharper than a pine cone. He wears two mismatched femurs strapped to his boots and pushes along with a bent hazel stick. You ask why he never switched to metal. He laughs so hard he nearly chokes on his potato. Metal breaks, he rasps. Bones bend. Then he tells you a story. About the winter of 1497, when the canal froze so hard it cracked 2 wagons in half and nearly swallowed a pig whole. I skated to town and back with a load of firewood, he says. 12 miles. In bones. You think iron could have done that? You try to imagine it, Hans, 50 years younger, slicing through the ice in the middle of a medieval snowstorm, firewood slapping his back, a jawbone tied to his foot. And somehow, you believe him. In these pockets, bone skates are more than tools. They're traditions. Heirlooms. Folk technology. One girl you meet, barely 8 years old, says her skates came from her great-grandmother and still carry good luck. You look closer. They're rabbit bones. Polished smooth. Stitched with wool yarn. You spend the afternoon racing chickens. Again, there's always someone racing chickens, and then skating across a broad patch of forest ice where someone's cleared snow using a broom made from bundled birch twigs. Every few laps, you stop to warm your hands near a log fire while people share stews, songs, and the best places to find bones with a good glide surface. Bone skating is no longer the default. But it's not dead. Instead, it's entered a strange new stage, half tool, half nostalgia. You see it in festivals, in local games, in the way someone rubs beeswax into the bone before tying it on with reverence. And more, it's being taught to kids, not as the only way, but as the first way. A kind of frosty rite of passage. That night, you sit with a group of travelers at a roadside inn. The fire roars. The mugs are full. The conversation turns to skating, and stories flow like hot ale. One man tells of falling through the ice on a pair of metal skates and being rescued by a farmer using bone ones because he didn't slip like some butter-footed noble. Another swears that a priest in his village uses only bones, saying iron disturbs the balance of nature. Fringe. Yes. But also kind of poetic. The oldest traveler in the group, a woman with a voice like a cracked violin, leans forward. Metal may be faster, she says, but bone remembers where it came from. Everyone goes quiet. Outside, the snow begins again. Slow. Gentle. Relentless. You step outside, strap on your skates, still bone, still holding, and glide into the night. The stars wheel above you. The ice sings beneath you. And for just a moment, it doesn't matter what's on your feet. You're moving. That's all that counts. The morning hits your face like a frozen pancake. Crisp, sharp, and kind of insulting. You're deep in the 16th century now, skating across the muted whispers of a Europe in flux. Wars are stirring, maps are being redrawn, and somewhere, a man named Shakespeare is wondering whether to be or not to be. But out here, where the ice still rules, you're focused on a different kind of drama. The death of bone skating is starting to look less like a collapse and more like a slow fade out. Like an old song that's still playing, but only in the background. And only when the modern instruments take a break. You arrive in a small Flemish town and immediately spot the difference. Everyone is skating, but not on bone. They're using sleek, thin metal blades mounted on heavy wooden soles. A few are even experimenting with curved tips, making the whole contraption look more like a weapon than footwear. You watch a baker, plump, pink-cheeked, very committed, slide elegantly past you with a tray of fresh bread balanced on one hand. "Iron," he shouts over his shoulder, beaming. "Best thing since sliced rye." "Bone." Not even mentioned. You wander through the market. Stalls sell everything from boot warmers to premium runner wax, which smells suspiciously like melted goat cheese. A blacksmith does live demos, turning raw iron into elegant skate runners with a few practiced strikes. Children watch with big eyes. Bone doesn't even make a cameo. You find a dusty shop on the edge of town that still has a few bone skates in the window. They're yellowed, brittle, the straps frayed to threads. Inside, the owner shrugs. "They're mostly for decoration now," he says. "Or nostalgia." He pulls one off the shelf and hands it to you like an old family album. "People say they used to sing on the ice." You hold it. Light. Familiar. Faint smell of dried beef. Then he says something that sticks. "We lost something when we made skating faster." Maybe he's being sentimental. Maybe not. You venture out onto the canal again, this time among a sea of iron blades. Everyone is fast. Everyone is loud. It's not the same gentle glide of old. It's sport now. Competition. There are races with banners and spectators. You even spot a judge holding up wooden scorecards. One guy gets a 3-4, a particularly ugly spin. You try your bone skates anyway. People stare. One man sneers. A child asks if you're poor. You resist the urge to ask if he's ever skated uphill both ways on elk tibia. You push off. It's harder now, the ice is cut into grooves from the sharp metal blades, and your smooth bone runners catch and wobble. You focus. Adjust. Find the rhythm. Soon, you're gliding. Not quickly. Not competitively. But differently. Smooth. Soundless. Your pole taps the ice like a metronome for forgotten music. You pass the racers, still shouting and huffing and falling dramatically. You pass the market stalls. You even pass a man playing a hurdy-gurdy, who stops mid-tune to watch you with a look that says, "Where did you come from?" You glide on. In quieter corners, people still remember bone. A woman outside town waves you down. She's middle-aged, her apron dusted with flour, and her eyes wide with recognition. "I haven't seen those in years," she says, nodding at your skates. "My grandmother had a pair. Taught me how to fall on purpose." You both laugh. She invites you inside for soup. It tastes like something that might once have been a root vegetable. She pulls out a wooden box with a pair of child-sized bone skates, tiny, beautifully carved, lovingly preserved. She says they've been in her family for generations. "No one uses them anymore," she murmurs. "But I can't let them go." Historians still argue whether bone skating ever really disappeared or just retreated. Became folklore. A cultural footnote. One theory says bone persisted into the 17th century in isolated northern regions, Lapland, the Baltics, Siberia. Places where reindeer still outnumber tourists, and you measure distance in how many fingers you can't feel. You decide to chase that theory. You travel north. Past cities. Past farms. Past that one guy who skated into a tree and blamed the wind. You reach colder lands, harder lands. And eventually, you find them. Bone skaters. Real ones. Not reenactors. Not hobbyists, but people who still use them because they work. Because they have to. One man shows you his skates, reindeer tibias, shaved flat, with soft sealskin bindings. He glides like the wind, like a fish under ice. like a memory that never fully melted. You follow him across a lake as the sun sets behind a curtain of pink clouds. Your bones glide again, effortlessly this time. The grooves are gone. The metal skaters are gone. Just you, the ice, and the ancient language of bone and balance. That night, you camp beneath a sky so clear it feels fake. The stars watch silently as you hang your skates to dry, their shadows dancing on the snow like tired ghosts. You wonder how long they'll last. Not the bones themselves, they're surprisingly sturdy, but the idea of bone skating. Of moving for necessity, not applause. Of gliding through winter not for medals or speed, but because the world left you no other road. It's fading. But it's not forgotten. Not yet. The wind greets you with teeth. You're far north now, so far that the daylight barely sticks around for dinner, and the stars show up early, already bundled in blankets of cold. The language has changed. The food has changed. But the bones? Still here. This is Sami country, deep in the upper reaches of Scandinavia. Not the fjord-soaked postcard places you find in tourist brochures, but the quiet, snow-buried wilds where reindeer still outnumber people and silence is not empty, it's waiting. It listens to you skate. And as you press forward across a frozen lake ringed with pine and shadow, something becomes clear. You've reached the last frontier of bone skating. It's not nostalgia here. Not quaint or quirky. It's just how it's done. A group of Sami herders welcomes you by the fireside, speaking in quiet, rhythmic tones. You sit cross-legged, trading stories in broken words and wide gestures, sipping something vaguely herbal and suspiciously warming. One man, tall, with braided hair and a nose that could cut wood, offers you a pair of reindeer bone skates. They're longer than anything you've seen, wrapped in sinew and soft hide. You take them reverently. Ancient. Well used. Honest. He smiles. You follow them the next day, skating behind a slow-moving herd of reindeer that clomp across the ice with the casual confidence of animals who know they're sacred. The Sami glide effortlessly alongside them, bone runners biting into the crust of snow atop the frozen river. They don't use poles like in Holland. Here, it's all balance and flow. You fall twice. Maybe 3 times. They pretend not to see. Bone skating in Sami territory isn't just survival. It's tradition passed mouth to ear, hand to foot, generation to generation. You see it in the care with which they shape the bones, usually reindeer metapodials or elk, boiled, dried, and sanded smooth with birch ash and seal oil. There's a rhythm to it. A sacredness. One elder, her face a topography of weather and wisdom, shows you her skates. Tiny. Child size. She made them for her grandson. He learned before he could walk properly, she says, as if that's the most normal thing in the world. You don't doubt it. And while other regions long ago moved on to iron and, eventually, steel, here, the materials are local, practical, spiritual. Bone doesn't rust. It's lighter, quieter. And for a people who believe that nature must be respected, used, not exploited, it makes perfect sense. Historians still argue whether the Sami preserved ancient skating techniques independently or reinvented them after seeing their use in trade routes. But ask anyone here, and they'll tell you, the bones chose us. You share a meal of smoked fish, dried berries, and something they insist is cheese but feels like a dare. You're too cold to argue. Later, you help carve a new pair of skates. The bone is fresh, still faintly yellow, not yet hardened by time. The craftsman works in silence, shaping it with a flint knife and his thumb, pausing every so often to nod at your technique. You'd last a week here, he says. You assume that's a compliment. You ask about races, competitions, trophies. He laughs. Why would we race? The reindeer always win. The more time you spend here, the more you understand. Bone skating hasn't survived despite modernity, it survived because no one tried to modernize it. No one felt the need to replace what already worked. There's no shame in bone. No class divide. No museum cases. It's just movement. Winter's answer to walking. You wake one morning and find the river gone, not melted, just buried under snow. No problem. The Sami pack the skates away and shift to sleds pulled by reindeer. But they promise the ice will return. It always does. Before you leave, they offer you a gift, a pair of bone skates, carved to your foot size, wrapped in hand-tanned leather and tied with a strip of dyed reindeer hide. You try to decline, they insist. These are not souvenirs, they say. These are shoes for the season. You carry them carefully as you begin the long skate south again, retracing a path now peppered with metal blades, sports clubs, and the rising hum of industry. Towns are growing. Roads are paved. And the ice is shrinking. But the bones still whisper in your pack. And you realize this isn't a history of rise and fall after all. It's a history of echoes. Bone skates didn't vanish. They migrated. They waited. And in places like this, in pockets of frost and memory, they held on. One last glimmer before the lights go out. You stop at a frozen ridge and strap them on, your new skates. Your last bones. They glide like old promises. Silent. Smooth. Timeless. The sun sinks lower in the sky, an orange stain on the horizon as you continue south, your skates a fresh pair of bone light beneath you. You've crossed the boundaries of history, pushed through centuries of technological innovation, the rise and fall of empires, and yet, somehow, the bones are with you. Through it all. Moving steadily through time, just like the ice beneath your feet. The world has shifted. Iron blades have replaced bone in cities. Skating is now sport, athleticism, recreation, and art. People race across artificial rinks in frilly costumes. The bones are gone from most places, replaced by sleek, gleaming runners of metal, carbon, and synthetic plastic. But here, you still find their whispers. You're approaching the Alps now, the ice thinning, the weather less predictable. Skating has become something else, a nostalgia wrapped in velvet advertisements for newfangled, shiny products. You pass through a town where every shop window displays some version of the same ad, the modern skate, faster, lighter, stronger. You smile wryly, gliding onward. The bones have been lost to progress, but progress doesn't always mean improvement. It's when you reach the foot of the mountains that you find the last vestiges of what you've been searching for. A quiet village nestled between towering peaks, where even the winter roads seem to be reluctant to go. The people here still use bone skates. Maybe not every day. Maybe not for travel anymore. But there's something undeniably stubborn in the air. You're welcomed into a modest inn by an old woman with a sharp smile. Her hands move with the care of someone who's crafted many things over the years, and she sees your bone skates almost immediately. You'll want to keep those for the next storm, she says, nodding approvingly. The new ones are too flimsy for these mountains. If the ice isn't right, you'll slide all over. There it is again. The truth you've carried with you. The practicality. The reason bone skates lasted longer than anyone ever expected. Not because they were better. Not because they were grander. But because they worked. The people in this village know that. They understand the delicate balance between progress and preservation. You sit by the fire that night, sipping herbal tea from a wooden cup, listening to their stories. One man speaks of the long winters when the ice stretched forever, and people would skate from village to village. The bones were as common as snowflakes then, he says. Now, the skates are passed down from father to son, from mother to daughter, tokens of a time when winters didn't just stop at the edge of the world, but stretched as far as the eye could see. You sleep in a room with an old wooden bed, blankets pulled high. The bones are resting against the wall, waiting for the next storm, the next glide, the next season. And as you drift off to sleep, you realize something important. This story, this strange journey of bone and ice, of evolution and nostalgia, has never really been about losing anything. It's about the quiet, unrelenting endurance of something that refuses to be forgotten. The bones didn't need to be the future. They didn't need to be the best. But they held on because they belonged. To the people, to the land, to the seasons, and to the stories of the past that get handed down in whispers like the wind. In the morning, the ice is thick again. It's perfect for skating. You lace up the bones, feel the familiar pull beneath your feet, and step onto the frozen earth. And just like that, you're part of the story again. A small thread, stretching across time, gliding quietly into the future. The fire flickers low behind you, the cold a soft blanket over the village. The bones whisper. And for now, that's enough.